Hello, everyone. Welcome to the very first, well, I guess you can't say it's the very first live episode of the Stephen Gervais or the Gervais podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gervais. I know I got Southern Canadian. That was from another podcast, but it is what it is. Today, I just want to say, hi, how's everyone doing? Hopefully, you're having a great rest of your weekend. I know it's Sunday. Tomorrow, we got to go all back to work, do that stupid grind that we always do so that, we can make the United States government happy. Although, let's be honest, they're not. They're never happy. It's kind of like when you go on your first date and you're like, hey, maybe this girl likes, a nice sit down meal. And yet, she wants you to have a 5-course meal at, like, your local Arby's. Who knows? So it's weird because I haven't done this in a while. So I'm kind of like hoping nothing screws up. Fingers crossed. We will have guests on the show. Maybe not tonight, but we'll definitely have guests on certain shows. Other shows we will do round tables. I can still do the reviews of movies, music, video gaming, TV shows, all that fun stuff. And honestly, you get to see me live now rather than pre-recorded because let's be honest, when I did pre-recorded, it was safe. I was able to not be such an idiot. Although, let's be honest, I am an idiot anyway. Also, if you are looking for podcasts that are new, different, go check out the Nonsensical Nonsense podcast. You'll find such great podcasts on their network, such as our show, Talking Shit. That's SHTTT. You'll also find shows like the Dollars and Cents podcast, which is hosted by another great podcast host, that being Jeff, who is also a co-host of the Nonsensical Nonsense podcast. Hey, Blazin', how are you doing? I'll show some of these comments up here. I'm probably bombing. Glick, let's go. And let's throw in my wifey as a comment as well. So, and also, if you love listening to, hey, Blazin', if you want to come in, I can give you the link if you want to come in. And also, for all my social medias, go to linktree.com/JarvisDemon. You will find my Twitch, my X or Twitter, whatever it's called. I mean, hey, have fun watching that movie, man. I appreciate that you're here, Blazin'. I appreciate that everyone's here showing that love and support. I know that I'm probably only going to do this one episode for an hour. So the movie I'm going to talk about is My Bloody Valentine. My Bloody Valentine was a Canadian horror movie in the 80s trying to really popularize the whole big genre that Halloween created in 1978. Although I do have to say this, Halloween did not create the horror genre. It made it bigger, I guess, is what you could call it. Because Halloween, the original one, wasn't really considered horror. It was considered more thriller, suspense. So with My Bloody Valentine, what they did was they took a lot of stuff from Halloween and other scary movies at the time, Friday the 13th, and while you're hearing about the killer they think it is, it's a whole different ball game on the other end. So while you're looking over here, you're ultimately supposed to be looking over at this side, although you're so interested in, like, well, who's Harry Warden and how has he escaped a mental institution? And meanwhile, at the same time, you're wondering, well, if Harry Warden is supposed to be here, who's the one doing all these killings? And My Bloody Valentine, what made it so particularly good is that it was different. Yeah, it took some horror tropes from Friday the 13th, Halloween, um, and kind of made it their own, I guess. Where they took the whole mystique of a guy in a miner's outfit killing teenagers who are just trying to have a Valentine's Day party, which they hadn't had a Valentine's Day party or dance since the collapse of the Hennigan mine, which is where our story begins. The Henniger mine, pretty much during a Valentine's Day party, miners were down there, they're chopping away, chopping away, chopping away. And lo and behold, the supervisors go like, hey, no one's down there. Let's go to the party. The miners will be safe. Well, no one checked the methane levels down below. So what happens is that they pretty much light a match and kablooey, the mine shaft they're in collapses. And when they finally dug them out, there's only one miner left. That's Harry Warden. Well, Harry Warden decided to pretty much get his revenge. And he killed anyone that he felt had put him in the position that he was in. He was later captured and then brought to an insane asylum. Well, the town of Valentine's Bluffs and the teenagers or young adults want to have a Valentine's Day party because they want people to forget about Harry Ward. And what ends up happening is that a man in a miner outfit is now trying to spread the fear of Harry Ward. The movie has a great soundtrack, has a great story, is a great whodunit because, like I said, you're looking at someone who you think is the killer when the killer is pretty much one of their own. And what ends up happening is it's a cat and mouse game all the way up until the end where we're shown who the real killer is and we're given the backstory of why the person we never suspected sorry about that, never suspected is the killer. And that's why I always love movies like this, that whodunit, is because you really don't need, a Michael or a Jason to make this movie work. What made this movie ultimately work was that the story built at the very bottom and eventually got to the top, hit that crescendo, and just came down and said, here's our killer. And when you find out who the killer is, you're like, wow, would have never guessed it was that person. Later, this movie would have a remake, which I always felt My Bloody Valentine should have honestly had a sequel. Or could have been a franchise. Maybe even the likes of My Bloody Valentine, Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream. It could have been up there, but for whatever reason, it didn't get its love. And I honestly, to this day, think that is the worst that could have ever happened to this movie, because you could have literally had a story that could have been better than Halloween, better than Friday the 13th. And I think this movie does, in a way, because you're on the edge of your seat following with the cop who's trying to figure out what's going on. He's trying to keep it quiet, but at the same time, the killer is pretty much in plain sight saying, hey, there shouldn't be, you're seeming to forget that you were warned about not having these Valentine's Day dances and parties. And that's why the killer feels in his mind he has to do this. And so, like I said, when it comes to the ending of the movie, it's in your face. It's ultimately one of those things where it was just like, holy crap, you know, how did we not see that it was this person? Um, was it this person all along? Did he have help? You know, we never know that until the very end of the movie. And honestly, this movie, sorry, couldn't have done any better than what it did. And I, for one, if you haven't seen it yet, go check it out. Go check out even My Bloody Valentine 3D, which is the remake. They do it a little differently, but ultimately it still does what the original did. And then also there is a fan film of I think it's called Valentine's Bluff, I think is the fan film for My Bloody Valentine. And it's ultimately, granted, I haven't seen the fan film yet. I gotta watch that. I want to do a review of that one night, and I will. But ultimately, at the same time, I think what really made this 80s horror gem not get the recognition it deserves is because, hate to say it, but we looked at horror differently back then. We just saw it as another ripoff of a great movie that had spawned this, and we looked at it as a Halloween ripoff. We looked at it as a Friday the 13th ripoff, and honestly, it's not none of those. Every movie that came after Halloween in terms of the horror genre wasn't directly a ripoff of Halloween. You would later have such great movies as, like I said, My Bloody Valentine, um, Terror Train, Road Games. You would have a lot. Friday 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Child's Play, Scream. Um, you would have a lot of these other movies that took what Halloween did and tried to spin it their own way. But when the Canadians did it, and later the Australians did it, it just didn't feel the same. I mean, there was a time where Godzilla wasn't looked at as what it is today here in America. We literally had the 1998 movie, which a lot of people love the 1998 movie. I think it could have been better. When they got the rights to that franchise, I honestly felt in my heart that they didn't have the same reverence as like Japan did, because Japan created Godzilla. They created the franchise. They used what happened with the Hiroshima bomb and all that. They used that and created something out of that. They took something very horrible and made something very, very good out of that. And so I think that's what pretty much happened with My Bloody Valentine or some of these lesser known horror movies, is because of the effect of, well, it was made in Canada, it was made in Australia, it was made yada, yada, yada. And you would later have ripoffs of, like, Jaws would have its ripoffs or copycats. As we know, Halloween would have its copycats or ripoffs. A lot of those movies would have their own ripoffs as well. And so it kind of just became, and I've always said this, it kind of became lowbrow because what had happened with the horror genre before Halloween is you had drive-in horror movies. And then you had Halloween, then you had after Halloween, and then you had after Friday the 13th, you had after Nightmare, you had after Scream, you had after so many things. And honestly, it was stupid because at the same time you had things that were happening that weren't anyone's fault. Like the people that did My Bloody Valentine, I'm sure weren't out there going like, "Oh, hey, let's copy Halloween or let's copy this or that." What they wanted to do was just put their spin on a genre that at the time was not overly saturated with um, was not overly saturated with uh, what was going to become all these new different characters and horror movies that we got. I mean, that's the thing that happens with this is that you had one thing that was new, and then you had a bunch of others that were going to above and beyond really, really, really just take what had already been made and tried to make it their own. And I think honestly, what would later become of this was that people didn't understand the magnitude of all these ripoffs. And again, saying ripoffs is kind of redundant, I guess, because it's such an easy cop out to say, hey, this movie ripped off this movie, or this movie did this, or yada, yada, yada. And when it did do those things, people were quick to say, oh, hey, it's a ripoff of this, or hey, it's a ripoff of that, or hey, it's this, or, all that stuff. And people couldn't just sit there and be like, hey, this is new. Let's give it a chance and see what happens. And when that did happen, it was too little too late because now you ultimately have too many cooks in the kitchen. You have too many people that are trying to replicate something that maybe they didn't know they could. And so at that point, it just became one thing after another. And that's the sad thing about it, is because when you look at all these things, it literally becomes its own worst nightmare. Like there was so many different horror movies that come out of what had happened, and at the same exact time when My Bloody Valentine comes out, they tried something new but were later criticized as being the same old, same old. It was literally like, hey, here's Halloween. Fast forward, here's My Bloody Valentine. And people loved My Bloody Valentine. It's just what happened was you also had these critics that dismissed it as another clone of Halloween. And it was never fair for movies that literally tried to take something that was big and hip at the time and tried to make their own story. I mean, you had Slumber Party Massacre, you had like I said, you would later have Friday the 13th, you would have Terror Train, you'd have Road Games, you'd have My Bloody Valentine, Slumber Party, or Sleepaway Camp, you'd have all these different new shiny things, but yet critics would dismiss them as ripoffs. And I think what really, really happened was that so many people got caught up in that they lost faith in what was coming. And that was new horror genres, where you had the splatter, you had the Galeo, which is the more of your gore-based Italian horror films. I mean, you had your comedy horror, which would be Evil Dead, and ultimately it crescendoed into what we would later get with Child's Play, Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream, and now we have new ones like Terrifier, Saw, Hatchet, and then of course you have the new timelines of Halloween. You have all this stuff coming up, but at the very exact time, you also have people that will dismiss these as just, oh, well, it's something that got lucky. It'll never happen again. And I think that's what happened with My Bloody Valentine, to be honest. And I think it was the stupidest thing for people to think that, because My Bloody Valentine never really got the respect it deserved. Granted, later generations loved the film, but when it came out, it probably was just looked at as, like I said, a ripoff. And it really could have been a franchise, in my opinion. And, you know, as I've always said, you know, my opinion isn't worth, you know, anything. But at the same time, like, hey, Brian, how are you doing today? Hopefully you're having a good day. And like I said, at the same time, I think what would later happen is no one knew what to do to make more My Bloody Valentine movies. And it really sucked, because what if Harry Warden or the Miner would become your new franchise killer, like Michael, Jason, Freddy, Chucky, Ghostface? I honestly think it could. I think it could have. Who knows? Maybe some company, distribution company, looks at what the remake tried to do and says, hey, you know what? Why don't we remake the remake, or remake the movie again, see what we have, and take it from there? I mean, this is something that literally I could see Blumhouse doing, is taking a franchise that was once, or not a franchise, but a movie that got released. You had to wait until I think like 2009 for a remake. It has a fan film. What if we look back at that look at that movie, look at the remake, and go, maybe, just maybe, there's something there. And then a franchise comes out, and then you have a whole new franchise. That's the thing that I think was sorely missed. And yes, sorry. And yes, you did have certain elements back in the day that just went like, oh, hey, there's this new thing out there called Halloween. We need to rip it off. And a lot of different horror movies did. I mean, hell, Jamie Lee Curtis made a career early on after Halloween where she was the damsel in distress. I mean, she did Terror Train, she did Prom Night, Blue Steel, which was a weird movie, but great movie at the same time. You know, she did so many of those movies where she was cast as Laurie Strode again, even though different name. And she later admitted to hating that, because it was something that she didn't want to do for the rest of her life. She hated horror movies. And then you had actresses that were in horror movies that ultimately stated that, hey, we love it. No, I have not yet Valentine's Bluff, but I want to because I love horror movies and I love fan films, and it's on my one of my watch lists that I have to watch. Um, and that's another thing. These fan films that are coming out are taking something and making it better, in my opinion. Like Friday the 13th, we have waited so long now for a new Friday the 13th movie. I mean, we are getting the Peacock TV series from A24, I do believe. So who knows what's going to happen with that? I've heard that it's changing different plots and all that. Who knows? Maybe it turns out really well. I mean, the Chucky series by Don Mancini was very, very well done on Peacock. Cannot wait to see that. I can't wait for another season of Chucky. Hopefully, there is another one. There is another movie in the works. This coming from Don Mancini himself. Um, and yeah, I honestly think My Bloody Valentine doesn't get its grand, like clap, applause, so to speak, because it was looked at as the same old, same old. But at the same time, it should have been looked at as something that it was, and it was new. It wasn't ultimately something that was just, oh, hey, it's a person killing teenagers and it's ripping off this movie. No, it should have been looked at as so movies that were in that era of rip-offs and all that as its own thing. I mean, we all know Friday the 13th is a rip-off of Halloween, but at the same time, it's its own thing. Nightmare on Elm Street ripped off both Halloween and Friday the 13th, but yet again, it's its own thing. Child's Play, its own thing. Scream, later in the 90s, kind of made fun of those early horror movies and did its own thing. So, honestly, do I believe that My Bloody Valentine should be a franchise? 100%. Right off the bat, you could have made that big. Now, hopefully, if they would have, let's go into an alternate timeline where the next big franchise is My Bloody Valentine. And it's made as many movies as Halloween. It's made as many movies as Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Child's Play. But yet, instead of making the mistakes that Friday the 13th would later make, Halloween would later make, Nightmare would later make, Child's Play would later make, Scream would later make, it keeps being fresh with Harry Warden as the killer, or as we learn in the ending of the first one, Axel as the killer. I mean, it was so open-ended at the end of the movie that literally it was harping to sequels. And when we didn't get that, I think what killed it for My Bloody Valentine was that we waited so long to get a remake. When the remake did just as well as the original, the only difference is the remake's in 3D. And honestly, I would love to see more fan films of My Bloody Valentine. I think it honestly could do. Sorry about that. Honestly, could do so much with that, with what they already have done. I mean, it's shocking how we haven't seen more remakes of these great movies or even continuations of these great movies in fan films, even documentaries of them. I mean, you literally probably could make a documentary on the making of My Bloody Valentine, or get the surviving cast members are still alive and be like, hey, what are y'all doing today? What did you think about this film? And you know what? I think I have my main role that I want to do with this podcast. Like I said, I want to have guests, and I've had guests on this show before. It's just now coming back to doing all this live stuff again through my own podcast. Maybe I do get some of the My Bloody Valentine originals remake, even the fan film. Maybe I get some more of those guests on here and kind of gauge what their interest would have been if there would have been sequels to My Bloody Valentine. I honestly think that'd be cool. And like I said, it's not just going to be about movies. It'll be about wrestling. We'll do roundtables. We'll have guests on the show. We'll have talking or reviewing movies, video games, TV shows, any and everything. And we'll have other podcasts on the show. We'll have so much going on with this show that people are literally going to probably get sick of the show. Hopefully not, but you never know. So yeah, honestly, I think I'm going to cut it short. I got what I wanted to do tonight, but Sunday nights at about 7 p.m. Central Standard Time is when I will be releasing a new live one. Hopefully next month I can, upgrade my whole StreamYard so then I can literally put it on Facebook and other places so we can get more viewers onto the show. And yeah, hopefully this show does really well. I know that my grand plan for this is to hopefully one day have more guests, more podcasters, and many other things. So thank you so very much for watching. Also, if you're looking for other podcasts or podcasters, go check out my buddies Talking Shit, which is Mark and Brian. They just did a very, very awesome interview with God, I can't remember his name. I have to look it up. Hold on one second. Richard John Walters, who was in the remake of My Bloody Valentine. It was a great interview. You will love Talking Shit. That's Talking and then SHTTT. They're on YouTube and all social medias. Also, thank you for reminding me that Talking Shit will have one of the greatest horror movie directors, Tommy McLaughlin, who directed Friday the 13th Part 6, and he had to bring back Jason. Go check that out. That will be April 18th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. I'll be checking that out because, let's be honest, great bunch of guys at Talking Shit Show. Also, go check out the Nonsensical Nonsense on YouTube. Glick, Jeff, myself, Connor, we try and, bring a new spin. Well, they brought a new spin to podcasting and then just allowed me to tag along as, the punching bag, or as Connor says, the Southern Canadian. Go check out Helen's mixtapes. Just go check out a lot of podcasters in general. Go check out Good Real Hunting. I know with the Nonsensical Nonsense, Mondays is Men Caring for Men, which is a men's mental health podcast show where Glick, Connor, myself, we try and break the taboos associated with mental health issues faced by men. We've been getting a lot of good positive feedback from not only men, but also women. So it's amazing that show has done what it's done. Tuesdays, you can listen to Jeff talk about business with Dollars and Cents. Wednesdays is Nonsensical Nonsense. Thursdays, we take a break and go check out our best friends at Talking Shit, where they interview guests. They have round tables, they have discussions. Great bunch of people. Friday, every now and then we have another music show called House of Glick, hosted by Glick. He does bring in guests. He does also talk about his style of music that he loves. Saturdays, we do the Open Door Challenge, and Sundays, we also do this show, which, let's be honest, if we're going to call it a show, we might as well call it the garbage show, I guess. But thank you so very much for joining me this Sunday. I will be back next Sunday. Hopefully we'll either have a guest or at least have some friends to join me on here. I love you all from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much for the love and support. I've almost hit the 5-year mark for doing this podcast, and I will have more on that at a later date and time. Thank you so very much. And also you can reach me at all my socials, which is linktree.com/JarvisDemon. And I will see you all next time.